I'm going to show you a complete guide into make.com and everything you'll need to know to get started building out your first workflow so you can get started streamlining your tasks so you can start running your business on autopilot. Make sure to watch all the way until the end because I'll be showing you some of the real systems I've built specifically for my clients' businesses. As an AI automation consultant, I built out hundreds of different workflows for not only my company, but to sell to businesses as well for literally thousands of dollars. Like this recent payment being $12.50, just covering an ongoing project for a solar company to automate their lead generation process. So if you're looking for personalized assistance, book a free one-on-one call with me using the link in the description, and I guarantee we'll help you run your company on autopilot, saving you minimum 10 plus hours every week. Also, join my free community group on School, as I'll be going over a more in-depth breakdown of this guide and for more valuable insights and resources not found on my YouTube channel. Link for that's also down below. So in this video, I put together a nice Google Slides that kind of just goes over some of the overview of make.com. So it's concepts, tools, features, and I'll even be coming into make.com showing you some of the specific scenarios I built out, how to actually do some of the things like setting up webhooks and everything like that. So make sure to stick until the end because I'll be showing you the specific scenarios that I built out for businesses. But I want to start with this first slide, which is basically what is make.com in AI automation. So make.com is a no-code automation platform that just allows you to connect apps and services to automate your workflows. So this does this through data handling, API integrations, and multi-step automation. So for this specific automation, we're having a webhook go to an Airtable, which is a CRM, then storing something in our Notion CRM, and at the very end, we're sending an email based off of different specifications. So let's go ahead and move on to common use cases of automation in businesses. So the first one being lead management and CRM management. So this is where you're automating lead capture. So you're automatically adding new leads from web forms or social media to your CRM. You're following up sequencing. So you're sending personalized follow-up emails or messages based on lead activity and lead scoring and assignment. So this is where you're evaluating and assigning leads to the right team members based on predefined criteria. So I'll come into make.com real quick and I'll show you an example of what this can look like. So really quick, I want to back up and show you my dashboard. So this is what it looks like when you first come into make.com. You sign up for an account. This is where you'll see your operations and everything. So as you can see, I have some unused operations. I have roughly 7,000. I'm only paying $11 a month, so it's super cheap to use. You can even use the free plan depending how many operations you're going to be using. And look at an operation as basically a token. So in ChatGPT, you're running things. Your results get based on tokens and your usage and everything. So similar to that, you have operations. So let's go ahead and come into our scenarios. And you won't really be focusing on many of these other tabs. So there's templates, connections, webhooks. Really, you'll just be focusing on scenarios. So you can also go ahead and check out templates. And this is just basically different blueprints. They're all super simple stuff. Nothing's too robust. But, like getting Trello notifications to Telegram. These are just blueprints that you can copy for yourself so you don't have to build them out. But let's go come into our CRM. And I want to show you an example of what I was just talking about. So here I have this very trusty lead magnet. And essentially when somebody fills out this form, it's storing their information into my Airtable, which is my CRM. Then it's doing a whole bunch of different things, which we don't really have to get into because it's a little more complex. But essentially I'm having AI just talk to this data that my form has received. So I'm getting pain points and stuff like that. And then I'm having AI create tailored responses based on those pain points and sending it in an email to the client or the person filling out the lead magnet. So that one's a little bit more robust, but now let's go ahead and move on to the invoice and payment management. So the first one is automating invoice generation. So this is where you can create and send invoices automatically when a sale is made, and payment reminders and record keeping, where you're just sending automatic reminders for pending or overdue payments. And for record keeping, this is just syncing payment details with your accounting software for accurate record keeping. And I'm going to show this at the end what this automation actually looks like. And it's one that I actually sold to a business, or a client, I should say. So make sure to stick to the end and I'll show you what that looks like. Now let's go ahead and talk about the core concept of automation. So here we're breaking this up into a few different things. So one, automations involve either moving, storing, or generating data. And make.com simplifies these processes through visual workflow design. So an example of this is just automating customer follow-up processes. So as I just showed you, it was all broken down very nicely. Whereas in Zapier, it's just linear and it's just not as visually appealing. Not that that's the only thing that it doesn't include and everything, because Zapier has a lot of limitations, and I find that make.com is a lot more robust. But so I wanted to get an example. So automating lead capture from your website, storing the data in your CRM, and generating follow-up emails. So this is one core use case I could say for businesses. Now let's move on to triggering scenarios. So scenarios in make.com always start with a trigger. Various triggers can be webhooks, new records, messages, mail hooks, or scheduled times. So for an example, a webhook trigger for new form submissions. So when a new lead form submission is happen on your website, this just triggers an automatic email welcome sequence using a make.com webhook. So we'll go back into make.com and we can just use the same scenario. So as you can see right here, I have a watch new responses. So this is my trigger. So we could delete this and delete that. And we could do different things like webhooks like we just talked about, and we'll get into webhooks in a little bit. But there's custom mail hooks, custom webhook, and webhook response. What you'll probably just be focusing on is custom webhooks. So essentially, if let's say you don't have an app integrated onto make.com, let's say you don't have, so this is a bad example, but let's say that Stripe isn't here. So essentially what you can do is you could get this webhook and you can go to choose your webhook. So let's just go with make.com form. You would copy this and input into your Stripe invoice. And essentially, since the application isn't on here, manually you can just use the webhook to talk to, that website Stripe, and basically just communicate all that data. So that's an example of a trigger. And we'll go back here. I'll actually refresh this real quick. And yeah, essentially, so this is just an example of a trigger. So we're watching new responses. So anytime a new response is made on my tally form, then this automation is going to trigger. Now let's move back into our slideshow. And let's go to the next section, getting into webhooks like I mentioned. So what is a webhook? Basically, this is an automated message sent when an event occurs. So this contains a payload, also known as data, just sent to a unique URL. So as I was talking about with sending that URL to Stripe, it's sending that payload or that data. So it's just allowing it to communicate. An example of this is triggering a make.com scenario from a form submission. So imagine you want to instantly notify your team when a customer schedules an appointment. A webhook can send the appointment details to make.com, which then sends a Slack message to your team. So that's an example of a pretty simple automation. Now let's talk about some examples of triggers. So as we already talked about, webhooks, which just instantly trigger on form submissions or different things. Watch records, where this just monitors new entries in Airtable or even Google Sheets. A lot of different use cases there. It's not just limited to these two. New message, where this triggers scenarios for messages in Slack, SMS, or maybe even email. Then there's scheduled times, where you could automate tasks at specific times, like daily reports that happened at 2 p.m. or something like that. So coming back into make.com, we have our schedule right here. So my scheduling is on, and the schedule settings. So for this little submission right here, or for this automation, I should say, this allows me to run the scenario immediately. So anytime somebody submits a form, this will run immediately. If I selected once, then it wouldn't run immediately. It would only run once at a specific time that I choose. So I could choose, the 9th of August at 1:56 p.m. Or if we do every day, we could do every day at a specific time. So we could do 1:56 p.m. every single day. And, you get the point. So you could do days of the week, days of the month, specify dates, on demand. And on demand basically just means this will run when you actually run the scenario yourself, manually pressing this little trigger or this little button right here. So let's come back into our slides. So let's further talk about some of the examples. So you could use a webhook to start a scenario when a customer submits a contact form. You could set a watch records trigger to update your CRM when a new lead is added to Google Sheets. You can automatically send a response in Slack when a message is received from a specific client, or you can even generate and email a sales report at the end of each day at whatever given time. Now, let's talk about APIs. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. So look at this as acting as a bridge connecting different software applications. So this just allows make.com to interact with apps like Twilio, Gmail, Airtable, Google Sheets, whatever. So many different apps. I can name thousands. An example is just sending a text message through Twilio from make.com. So consider APIs as the middleman that connects your online store with your accounting software to just automatically record your sales. Now let's talk about how API calls work. So we have the client, which is a make.com scenario. This sends a request to an API. The API processes the request and communicates with its server. Then the server performs the task like sending a message and then sends a response back. The API just delivers the response to the client, going back to make.com scenario. So let's go ahead and try to break this down a little bit further through this example. So when a customer places an order within within a website, then Make.com can use APIs to notify your team via Slack and update the inventory in your database. So going back to Stripe and everything, so as obviously Stripe is in here already. So hypothetically, Stripe isn't there. It's not one of the thousands of apps that they have in here, because they do have thousands of different apps, as you can see. But anyways, let's say Stripe isn't here and you wanted to communicate with Stripe. So what you can do is just search up on the internet Stripe documentation, and as long as they have some complex or just some API documentation in general on their website, then you can use Make.com or some different low no code automation tool to streamline and connect these two data points together. So now let's come back to our slide. And now let's talk about HTTP requests. So HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and this is used for data exchange on the web. So this facilitates communication between a client and a server. So the types can be GET, which also may be seen as retrieving things, POST, where you're sending things or putting things there, and PUT is just updating. So maybe you want to update a specific record in your Google Sheet. That's what you would use that for. And then deleting, and I'm not even going to go explaining that one. So an example is sending data to a server using a POST request, because there you're sending that data. So an example is, think of HTTP requests as the way your browser asks a website for information or sends data, like submitting a form online. So I actually break down HTTP requests further in my school. I highly recommend you go check that out. But now let's talk about some tools for automation, because there is a lot of tools in Make.com. So tools to accomplish automations, and let's talk about flow control tools. So you have iterator, array aggregator, router. So I'll show you really quick what these look like and where you can find them. So coming into our scenario, we have flow control right here. And so this is built into every scenario. So you can always find this right here. So you have repeater, iterator, array aggregator, router, break, commit, ignore, resume, rollback. I'm not going to get into all these today, but there you have tools right next to it. So you have basic trigger, get multiple variables, get variable, increment function, set multiple variables, sleep, and all these different ones like composing strings. Now let's actually break some of these down. So for the first one, being an iterator, this just processes multiple items individually in a scenario. And the array aggregator, this collects multiple items for batch processing. And the router splits scenarios into different paths based on conditions. Now I'll show you these in Make.com specifically after I get through the examples. So for an iterator, let's say you want to process each new lead individually to send personalized emails. This is what you use an iterator for. An array aggregator, this is just combining multiple sales records to generate a weekly report. And the router, this is where you're going to route different types of support requests to appropriate team members. So look at it as being different paths. And routers, I guarantee, are going to be what you use the most among all of these different ones. I wouldn't even focus too much on these two right now. I would just nail down the routers. So I'll show you really quick. I'm not sure if I have a router in this scenario or not. No, I don't. But let's say I want to go down a different path. So we can set up a router. So we'll add a manager or add a router right here. And we want to include two different paths. So we want to go down this path, which is my normal automation. And let's say if this automation, let's say somebody fills out my form and they don't have their name in it. So we could go down a different path. So how do you find out even if they have their name or not? Well, you include filters. So you can include a filter right here, set up a label, name, whatever you want, just say filter name, and then condition. So basically, if you just put conditions like their, we'll find name. So name is right here. So if that equals to, or if that does not exist, then it would go down this path right here. So this filter, it will only go down this path if that filter, or if that name is not in this form. Otherwise, it's just going to proceed as normal, going down this this path or this route. But yeah, that's what routers are used for, and they're pretty simple. And there's a lot you could do with them. You could create giant automations with just this feature right here. But now let's go ahead and talk about the next slide, which is the general tools. So automation tools, you have the text aggregator and you have sleep. Text aggregator, this just combines multiple text inputs into one, and sleep, this pauses the scenario for a specified duration. So text aggregator, you can combine customer feedback into a single summary document, Or if you're asleep, you can delay sending a follow-up message for a specific time to avoid immediate responses. Now let's go back to make.com. I'll show you sleep really quick. So if we just type in sleep, or you could even go down here and grab that tool right there. So if we wanted, 1 second, I'll put this in. So we'll do a delay of 60 seconds. So if we want a delay to happen from here to here, we just put a sleep right there. So maybe you want to wait sending an email. So let's say you're sending 2 different emails. Hypothetically, there's 2 Gmail modules. So just visualize that, and you want to separate the time between the sending of those emails. Then you just put a sleep module right there. Now let's go back. And let's talk about filters. So we already kind of briefly went over filters and everything, but essentially filters control the flow of data based on specified conditions. So this helps route data to appropriate actions based on set criterias. An example is just filtering leads based on their source for targeted follow-ups. Example of this is setting up a filter to only process leads with a high value score, ensuring your sales team focuses on the most promising prospects. Now let's go to error handling. Super important. We won't dive too deep into this, but we'll get into just the foundations and everything. So error handling, this is where you're managing errors with alternate routes or native error handling tools. So there's break, ignore, and resume. So break, this just stops the scenario and saves its state for future processing. Ignore, this continues the scenario, skipping the error. And resume, where this just uses backup data to continue the scenario if an error occurs. Now, hopefully some of these examples can help clear up any confusion you might be having. With break, you can stop processing your automation if there's an issue with some customer data, whatever that may be, and fix it before continuing. So this just stops the automation, allows you to go into the automation and fix whatever you have to do, and then you would have to actually, start the automation for it to go back up and running. Or there's ignore, where you can skip invalid email addresses, for example, and continue sending to valid ones. So if there's a break, you could just include an ignore error handling, and essentially it'll just continue the automation. It won't stop processing. You won't have to go back in there and continue the automation yourself. It'll keep going, but just skip the one process that it didn't work for. And then resume, this just uses default values if specific customer information is missing. But going back to make.com and what we were talking about with that filter and that path, if they didn't have the name in their form, then you could just give them a default name. So Nick, for example, you can give that a default name and it'll continue resuming the automation. So let's get into the last bits that I told you we would come to, which was use cases and going over some of the automations that I've actually built out for different clients. So this first one is automating customer communications. So an example is a trigger where you have a new lead form submission and the action is sending a welcome email, notifying the team, and adding to CRM. So the benefit of this, as you probably could understand, it's timely and personalized engagement with new leads. And a further example is a new lead fills out your contact form. Make.com then triggers an automation that sends a welcome email, adds a lead to your CRM, and notifies your sales team in Slack. So I want to show you, hopefully this is the right one. Okay, so we have an event registration. So this was for an event hosting company. So essentially whenever they had somebody fill out a form, or somebody, I should say, signed up for their event, they registered for the event on their website, then we're setting up a custom webhook. It's just hooked up to their website. So whenever they signed up on that form, it's then creating a notification or a update in their CRM, just creating a record with all that information, like their name and everything. And it's creating a database item in Notion. It's sending a little sleep parameter right there. I think that's 60 seconds. 1 second. I'm not too sure why that's actually there. We could just delete that. But it's then going down to 2 different paths. So depending on what type of event they signed up for, it'll go down these different paths. So it'll send them an email and all that, or it'll send them a text message and then just updating the CRM further, waiting for responses from them on email or waiting for a response from them on Twilio. Then it'll update their CRM accordingly and then send them different emails. So that's one of the automations right there. And I will get into that further, actually building it out further. And you can check that out in my school. Now let's talk about the use case of managing invoices and payments, because I know a lot of businesses often have trouble automating their invoices. So a trigger, when a new invoice is created or a payment due date is approaching, the action would be sending reminders, update financial records, or notifying the team. Benefits of this, as you would understand, is streamlining invoicing and payment processes, with which lead to improved cash flow. Example is automatically sending payment reminders a week before the due date and updating your accounting software once payments are received. Now I'll go to make.com. And so this was a automation for a pharmaceutical company. So basically they have this form online that their customers or leads would have to fill out. So this was to qualify for a specific drug. Now, it's not connected right now. This is just a demo. But essentially, when they're filling out this form, it's watching for responses. So giving their name, all their qualifications, like why they think they should qualify for this drug, all their health issues, and other ongoing stuff. Now, if they did qualify, then this automation would trigger and it would start a Stripe payment. So it would make a Stripe payment, send that to them. And if they make that payment, it will send them a Calendly link, which is where you could just schedule an appointment with the doctor. Then it'll send an email with a confirmation and everything to that customer, or the patient, I guess I should say in this scenario. Then it's updating their CRM, which they use Google Sheets for, just updating the rows with that information, then sending an email. And here it's going to, I think it's a month later or 60 days, it's going to send them an email. Basically, it's checking if they made their payment once again. And if they did make the payment, then it'll go down this route right here, send them an email. And if it didn't, it'll send them a different email just reminding them to pay, and it'll update the CRM accordingly. And that's really everything when it comes to the basics of make.com and learning how to set up your first workflows to start automating your business. Hopefully you found some real value within this. And remember, if you want the full video with further breakdowns onto things like the tools and more specific features, then join my school community. Links in the description. And if you're looking for personalized help to identify what systems and bottlenecks are holding your business back from growing, then book a free one-on-one call with me. We'll not only identify your growth constraints, but implement a systemized plan to solve them and handle 100% of the process. That being said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.